All righty. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are here. I want to thank you for joining our bi-monthly webinar. We have some really awesome presenters for you here today who will speak on their experience during their review. And then I will talk about updates for 2022, 2023. And then we will move into the Q&A portion, which my colleague Terrence Meaner will moderate. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, who is, of course, I can't find the here it is, to our first presenter here, Analu Fonseca from Oregon State University. Analu, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Shabnam. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, if you are that far away. My name is Ana Lucia Fonseca Tapia, and I work as Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Oregon State University Extension and Engagement. And we recently went through a federal civil rights review with NIFA. And me and Elsa Fry, also in the call, who is the program representative for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, we share with you our experience, our learnings, and the results of our report with you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Elsa Fry. Like Analu said, I'm the program representative for OSU Extension's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Unit. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so we can get started. All right, Analu, are you seeing that?
Yes, I am seeing that. And that amazing mountain is one of the many amazing mountains that you should come and visit in Oregon. I believe it's Mount Jefferson or Mount Hood.
It might be Mount Hood, but we'll get back to you on that.
Okay, so as you know, we will share with you our experience, and what we most acknowledge is that NIFA reviews 9 points when they do the civil rights review, and I believe now they ask you for these 9 things, as Shabnam will expand later, but for us at Oregon State University, we were like the last group of universities that got review on the 26 previous points. So it was hard for us to put together all that information and then categorize it in the 9 points. And we were exactly on the review at the time where NIFA was changing the review process to the 9 points. So it was definitely a process. However, the 9 points that the review focused on was organizational capacity. So how are we positioned to really fulfill all our civil rights requirements? Civil rights acknowledgement procedures, and that's from all our faculty and staff, and also our volunteers and people that deliver extension programs. Advisory board and committees composition, program delivery, data collection and integrity, non-discrimination on the basis of sex, public notifications, that's the very beautiful posters that we must have, and accessibility for individuals with disabilities, and language access. So those were the elements of the review that we had. And I will start by saying that having a review exactly at this point in time, coming out of a pandemic, after a lot of changes in our country, in our world, it felt like a good cleanse or like an annual check with a doctor. It felt like a good review of the things that we were doing well and a good awareness of the things that we need to do better. So I think that having a review for us was very beneficial in a sense that we were able to identify and make plans for the things that we became aware needed to improve. So in this presentation, Elsa and I will share with you our observations. So we are going to be very vulnerable and tell you everything that we didn't do very well, how it got observed, and how we fixed it or addressed it in the corrective action plan. The review ended when we got the report from NIFA saying our results. However, now we are in the monitoring phase. So we worked on a corrective action plan that we will deliver to NIFA, pointing out how we are fixing or how we are addressing their observations.
So we're going to start by sharing with you the first area where we received some feedback from NIFA. In the organizational capacity section, we were asked to implement a procedure to ensure that our non-discrimination statement is included in all of our contracts and agreements. Like Analu said, this review process was a really positive process for us. It kind of helped us identify gaps and areas where we could do things better. And in this particular case, it helped us identify our relationship with the larger university. So we have our non-discrimination statement on some of our contracts and our county agreement templates, and we have been doing some of those processes. However, we have some contracting processes that go through our central university contracts office. And so through this finding, we were able to do some coordination with our extension operations unit to just ensure that we're including the statement on all contracts and agreements. For example, we had it on things like the county partnership agreements, but we did not have it on things like the employee transfer agreements or technology use agreements. There were certain things where we're going to be adding that to that. We also will be working with, as I said, the Central University Contracts Office to ensure that this non-discrimination statement is included in all of Extension's contracts with any subrecipient of funds or any vendor that we work with. We were pleased to get some positive feedback in this area too. I think our review team did an awesome job of sharing with us what we did well as what we could improve upon. And that was really nice to hear. And, you know, it made us feel validated for the work that we are doing. So thank you, team, for that. In this case, we did have a clear structure for civil rights within the organization and demonstrated that faculty and staff have adequate access to the civil rights unit, which is Analu and I. So this was a finding under organizational capacity. Similar to the organizational capacity finding, we had a finding under our civil rights knowledge and procedures section. And that was another area where our extension unit of Oregon State University, it is reliant on some of the central university offices for some of our processes. In this case, the full list of protected categories was not listed on our equal opportunity and access complaint form, which is the complaint form that all of the university, including Extension, uses. So again, that helped us identify where we're reliant on university offices and how, you know, we need to better work with those offices to ensure that extension expectations are being met. In this case, it's just a matter of working. We've reached out to EOA. They're going to add the appropriate language to their form. And, you know, in all, that's helped us strengthen that relationship and help them understand what our needs are here in extension. So those are our first two areas where we received findings.
Something that we knew beforehand, but that it was very useful to get it in a federal review, was that we had different programs reporting better than others, and that we have different boards being more representative than others. And maybe this is true in most states across the nation, but it's definitely true in Oregon. So one of the observations that we had is that we needed to develop and implement a centralized recruitment strategy to ensure advisory board demographics are in parity with the population. And we need to develop a consistent and centralized method to collect advisory board rec data. So having this finding as a director for diversity, equity, and inclusion was a really good opportunity to partner with the Office of Technology and the Office of Communications to incorporate CRM or customer relations marketing tools and other identification tools to do a dual strategy for engagement of advisory board members and also demographics reporting in a way that we can have people to self-identify themselves and give us their contact in a voluntary way, but constantly. And so our response was that we are gathering information about current practices and what each program is doing to inform a general template and process. And we also are working with IT to ensure data is collected and stored securely in Salesforce. That is our program that we use for data gathering. One thing that you will see here in the response is that it says we need your input. And this is because one of the things we did is we chose this observations and this responses to all of our program directors and all of our program leaders and regional directors across the state to make sure that the strategies that we were going to set, we are going to do in the report, are doable and relevant for each extension program. For us, it's very important that the review is not only a document, it's also a path of action or of strategic action towards our inclusive excellence goals as well as our civil rights compliance goals. Another observation that we had is that we needed to develop a barrier analysis to identify challenges impacting the participation of underrepresented groups, and then develop a plan to address any barriers identified. This is very good because we in extension do needs assessment, but we are not so good at calling them barrier analysis because we don't incorporate the civil rights language. So having this observation gave us the opportunity to gather information about practices from the different programs, and then see what are the pain points or what are we getting stuck when complying with all of our responsibilities or when expanding access to our extension programs. And one of the great things that happened as a consequence is that when we gather input from program leaders and regional directors, they themselves started asking their own faculty and staff to implement this barrier analysis. So in a way, the civil rights report became our ignite or of our motive or energy for faculty and staff to do things that we knew would have to be done, but do them now and just get them done, like this barrier analysis that we are asking everybody to complete in this upcoming calendar year.
So going along with the barrier analysis, we also received a finding that we need to have a centralized system to collect the race, ethnicity, and gender information on our program participants. So this goes hand in hand with analyzing what keeps people from attending and not attending our programming. We needed to capture, and we are working on a strategy to capture the reg data of who our participants are. This, as Analu mentioned, was another area where we had something in the works, but this review process helped us kind of ignite and light a fire under the need for this system to be in place. So our faculty were previously and are currently reporting in a system called Faculty Success. They collect their participant reg data through various methods. Sometimes they use, in-person sheets that people fill out. Sometimes they just put it in a registration survey. So folks are self-identifying when they register for a program or event. And then this Faculty Success platform collects that information, stores it, and then in turn we'll loop back around and we'll be able to pipe in census data. So do a parity analysis, which will go hand in hand with the barrier analysis that Analu mentioned. So we're very excited about this effort. Analu also mentioned this, but working with different partners in extension in our unit and in the university has been really crucial to this process. And this review kind of helped us identify like who's who are our main partners, who do we need to work with to ensure that civil rights responsibilities and efforts are carried out. A lot of times civil rights responsibilities are put on one position or one unit, or it's a little bit of someone's position description, but it's really a team effort. And everybody from our IT department to our program leaders to our unit to the whole university really plays a crucial role. So it was interesting to go through this process and really identify, who can help us do this work and who can help us move things along. This gets us to our last area that we received feedback around. Language access is a huge need for most extension services right now. What our finding was that we need to conduct limited English proficiency needs assessments for all of our programs and service populations, and then develop a language access plan. We were actually, I think we were the most excited to receive this finding because this is an area where we've put in a lot of effort. Our unit is just Analu and I, and we had prior to the review developed pretty extensive web resources. We developed translation tools that are web-based. We have some guidance. We have the 4-factor analysis that most of you are probably familiar with present on our website, but what we didn't have yet was a fully fleshed out plan. So receiving this finding allowed us to show the importance of needing that plan. We've now created a pretty much final draft of that plan. We're excited to share it with NIFA, and we're really excited to just flesh out the guidance in this area. Analu, was there anything you wanted to add regarding language access?
Yeah, so Elsa can drop in the chat. So this finding really was a good platform to also communicate to the state our commitment to language access and what we are doing well. We recently launched our Spanish web page in extension at Oregon State University. That is that all of our content is now bilingual and it's now in Spanish. And at the same time of launching this, and of course we launched this as a consequence of quality analysis when we evaluated the number of limited English proficiency population here in Oregon, and the language that came up is Spanish for our counties. And we knew this from our census data. But what we are hoping to complete in the next, well, we're not hoping, we are going to complete in the next calendar year, it's to have the language access plan that it's pretty much a document that is outlining all of our resources, all of our tools, and all of our imperatives. So everybody can just grab it and use it to do a needs assessment in their own programs and gather the tools that they need for language accessibility. And I believe that Elsa was trying to show the web page, but maybe she can just drop the link in the chat. And
I'm going to drop, so I did drop our OSU extension website into the chat, and you can check out the bilingual feature on that webpage. In a moment, I'll also drop our language access page link into the chat. Currently, it has all of our guidance, which might be a great resource for somebody if you're working on this kind of effort. It will also eventually contain the language access plan that we just mentioned once we have it reviewed by NIFA and fleshed out by our leadership. So keep an eye out if you're interested in that.
In addition, so one of the things that we always make sure to do, Elsa and I, is that we are in charge of professional development. So we coordinate the Extension Annual Conference, and we coordinate trainings by region every year about specifically civil rights responsibilities, and a big part of that is language access. So we do a lot of education and outreach about how to perform a language access and how it goes beyond interpretation or translation, how it starts with a needs assessment and really knowing your population and like knowing what they need, and then think about what's the best strategy to meet that need. One of the things that we were very proud of was the kudos that we received from NIFA. So we did have a lot of recommended actions, but as you can see in the next slide, we also got a lot of commendable practices, and you can read them. But basically, as a unit whose mission is to lead organizational change to be more inclusive and to redesign extension to be more relevant and comply with civil rights and go above and beyond, it's very important to have documentation that really reminds you two things. One, that yes, you are working and your efforts are worth it because you are accomplishing change. Number two, there is still a lot of things to do. So having that dual message was very important and needed. So we need to recognize both things, that we are doing great and that we are also not doing great in other areas. And this was a very good way to get to plan our strategies better. And with that, I will leave you because we have other great colleagues, which we met informally with other universities. And I encourage you all to contact us, and I'm sure the other colleagues that are going to present, and learn from the things that we went through and leverage on each other's experience with civil rights, because we are doing significant effort and putting a lot of resources, intellectual, monetary, in language, in creativity, to really be more inclusive and accessible. And I think that we need to partner instead of replicate the wheel many times. And that's our contact information. And that's it for today.
Thank you so much, Analu and Elsa. We appreciate your insight and your feedback. I want to mention that this specifically for extension, the review areas for the research programs, HSIs and tribals are a little different. And I will definitely go into all of that during my portion of the presentation. Next, I want to turn it over to Eric Dunens, who is from Pennsylvania State University Extension. Eric?
Thanks, Shabnam. So again, just by way of introduction, my name is Eric Dunens, he, him, and I'm the Strategy and Compliance Specialist for Penn State Extension. And as Shabnam mentioned, that there are a few different ways that the review is happening. And so we have been going through our review of extension at Penn State. And through that process and thinking about what I wanted to share today, I'm really happy that Oregon State University was able to provide such a great overview of what some of that process has looked like, because I'm going to talk a little bit more about the effective or kind of like the feelings-based response that Penn State went through as part of this process. And so I'm going to answer three primary questions. And the first question that I want to just respond to is, what was our experience like? And when I was thinking back through this, the first piece that really came to mind was that it was collaborative. At the point that we realized that we were on the schedule and we received our letter with information about the data and document request, it was really a great opportunity to kind of do an all hands on deck to make sure that we were going to be able to provide the information necessary to go through this review. There were a number of folks involved with that, and I specifically want to highlight Steve Buchholz, who I believe is on this call, who pulled together a team across our organization, including folks involved with our relationships in counties and in the public, folks from our programs, folks from our data team, and just across the organization to ensure that we were going to be able to provide documentation and examples of the work that we've been doing. And so it was a really great opportunity to build some of that muscle just internal to our organization. But it was also a really great opportunity to be collaborative with the equal opportunity staff from NIFA. One of the things that I think we were pleasantly surprised to find is that there was a lot of good back and forth through this process. And so whether it was understanding that we might need a little additional time to provide documentation for that data collection piece, or if we had suggestions on ways that we might actually provide information through the process, there was healthy back and forth through emails, through phone calls, and there were always staff available to make sure that our questions were being answered and to also be open to our ideas throughout that process. And just as a case in point, one of the things that is maybe unique about Penn State Extension is that we really operate on a statewide program approach as opposed to like a county-based approach. And so we still have folks in counties, but we're trying to bring their expertise to bear wherever that need is in the state. And so when it came to, like, for instance, providing our program parity data, it made sense for us to be able to provide that on a statewide level, especially in light of the pandemic. And so the equal opportunity staff were open to the ways to reflect that information that made sense for our organization. So that was like a really good case in point of the way that they were willing to work with us to make sure that this review was going to be meaningful for our situation and context. The second question that I want to answer is, what was it like to work with equal opportunity staff? And so I talked a little bit about how we had the opportunity to be collaborative. There were two other words that immediately came to mind as well. The first is a hyphenated one, straightforward. And so the good news is that through this process, I felt like equal opportunity staff communicated sufficiently clear guidance to ensure that we had enough confidence to move forward with our actions without so prescriptive as to be binding. And so this, again, kind of gave us place to make sure that we were able to customize and make meaning for what would be useful for our institution, especially as this review would come back and reflect upon us. In that sense, then, it was also incredibly supportive. And so as we had opportunities to work with our equal opportunity staff through this review, it really came across that they were genuinely encouraging of our efforts and wanting to support our areas of growth, which allowed us to create a real space of vulnerability. And so going through this review, Penn State Extension really wanted to actually have that mirror held up to us, which meant that, if we're doing something well, we wanted that to be authentic praise. But if we also had areas of concern, that also came through. And that was only kind of something that we were able to do by feeling like we had a strong rapport with our reviewers, and that, what we shared would come back to us in a way that would help us advance our efforts around our civil rights goals. And that's kind of the third question. So at this point, we are through many of the phases, and we're getting very, very close to moving into our ongoing monitoring and compliance. And so I think that's the big question, right? Did this review help Penn State Extension achieve our civil rights goals? And the answer that I would provide is certainly. One of the things that I was really surprised by, but also appreciated, was through the interview process. I was asked by our interviewers, if there was anything that I wanted to ensure would be included in the report, acknowledging that sometimes the weight of a federal report carries a little bit more strongly with folks in the organization than an internal team or just an individual employee. And so it was that kind of care and concern to know that we're all pushing in the same direction, that, ultimately what we want to see is, Penn State Extension better live out our mission of serving all the residents of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so it was the kind of piece now where I feel like with the recommendation in hand, and I know Anna and Elsa just talked about this as well, that, in many ways that this then kind of becomes a rallying cry or a rallying point to engage others in this work across the organization with additional legitimacy. So, as I kind of reflect and review less about some of the nuts and bolts, but more just about what did this look like, kind of from the emotive side and practice, there was certainly those moments where, we were scrambling to try to get things together on our side, and then moments where, we provided something and then we're anxiously holding our breath as we awaited response. But by and large, it was a really positive experience that made us feel like we were in partnership with NIFA through this review. In service of all of the residents that we work with. So I will maybe just leave it at that, and I'm happy to answer further questions, or if people are curious about the kinds of things that came up in our recommendations review, happy to share that information as well, and I'll drop some of that contact information into the chat. And so I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for your time.
Eric, thank you so much for your experience with our reviews. We really appreciate that, and I know that our grantees do as well. The same with the Oregon State Extension reflection. Thank you both very much. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gregory Lardy, who is from North Dakota State University Research. So we did hear about Penn State and Oregon, who are both extension, and now we're going to hear a little bit about research and North Dakota's experience during the review. Dr. Gregory Lardy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon or good morning, whichever the case may be, to all the participants here. As Shabnam mentioned, I am serving as Vice President for Ag Affairs here at NDSU. Our review is actually a research review, and so it was a review of our research efforts relative to civil rights. So I'm going to hopefully get this to advance here. There we go. I'm just going to talk a little bit about process and then a few maybe helpful hints that we found during the process. So first off, much like Eric mentioned, we found the NIFA staff to be incredibly helpful through this process. We had several meetings ahead of time as we prepared for the review, meeting with staff to understand what was going to happen, what we should expect. The staff was very prompt at answering questions that we had, either in the virtual meetings or via email as we moved ahead. The actual time frame as we got into the review didn't move quite as quickly as we had expected, which was actually just fine. It took us a while to gather the necessary information and come up with the data that was being requested. So we, I think, ended up taking a little longer than we expected on our end, but that was actually just fine. Staff conducted a number of interviews with our faculty, our staff, some of our students, administrators, and our stakeholders as part of this process. And so that was all done virtually. In the past, I know some of these reviews have been done with site visits, but we found that the virtual experience actually worked quite well. We did have a follow-up exit interview at the conclusion of all the interviews, so had a chance to recap with NIFA staff. And then a few months after the conclusion of those interviews, we received a report. So we're in the process now of responding to the report and developing our response to that, coming up with our plan in terms of how to respond and do the things that were asked of us. And we had about 60 days to respond. So we're coming up on the tail end of that for our review here, and we hope to have that submitted to NIFA soon. Just a couple things I would recommend to the group in terms of responding to the reviews and being ready for them. I think in most institutions, there's not one single person that's going to have all of the data and all the information that is going to be requested. So it really helps to assemble a team of people to be able to address the things that are being looked at. And so we had a number of our administrators that were participating. We engaged our Office of Equity and Diversity for some of the data and items that they would have relative to policies and so on. We engaged in a couple of instances some of our budget personnel and our grant and accounting personnel for some of the questions that we needed access to relative to contracts. And then one of the things that we did early on was actually created a Microsoft Teams folder, a Teams working group, to assemble all of the documents and files that were being reviewed and needed. Rather than trying to email large number of files or that sort of thing, we consulted with NIFA staff and then got permission to create a Teams folder where we could grant permission to the NIFA staff to be part of that team and access all the information that was needed. So we could have team members here in our units on campus adding requested documents and information. NIFA could review those. It actually worked pretty seamlessly. And so that's one thing that we found that was really helpful, is a way to kind of centralize a centralized repository of where we were going to store the information that was being requested and that we needed to assemble as part of that. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and that's kind of the short version of our report here, but it was a very pleasant experience. Like I said, NIFA staff was incredibly helpful through this process.
Dr. Lardy, thank you so much for your reflection and experience on the review that you received from NIFA. Next, we are going to have, let me see here. We are going to have North Carolina A&T University, Dr. McLaren. Dr. McLaren, I'm going to take it over to you, or hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Shabnam, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. Antonio McLaren here. I serve as the Civil Rights Program and Accountability Program Specialist, and I have sort of a unique set of perspectives to bring. I'm not going to be as mechanical as my colleagues who have just presented, who, by the way, did I think a fantastic job of really laying out the review process, particularly Anna Lou and Elsa. Thank you for that overview with respect to the cooperative extension review process. Ours was similar, the same 9 areas. We went through the same 9 areas as well. And I'll also just want to say thank you to Eric's and Greg for your perspectives. Some of the things that I experienced are very similar. The virtual participation from a review process, I agree with you, Greg, that it was great. It worked for us very well. But let me also just throw in something else. I also, I might be one of the few people who, in terms of coordinating this review process on the campus, I was not a member of the university prior to the review. So I was brought in as a consultant to really manage and coordinate the review process, because at the time, our program evaluation accountability coordinator position was vacant. So North Carolina A&T Cooperative Extension reached out to me to come in and step up to manage the preparation process for the compliance review. And that kind of gave me sort of an objective lens. I think there were pros and cons, but I was really stepping into a new environment, having not been an employee of Cooperative Extension at A&T prior to the review process. So I will note that as being a very unique aspect of the review. The other thing that is unique to me or unique to the review process is I also came with prior NIFA experience. So I was employed with NIFA for over 15 years, and that kind of gave me some existing knowledge of the civil rights federal regulations, having been a program leader in the past, managing programs that essentially had to align with those regulations in the first place. So I already came with some of that experience. However, what I did not have was the on-the-ground university experience on the campus nor in the counties. And being that this was being done during a pandemic, the entire review process was virtual, including my interaction with my A&T colleagues. That was also virtual. I never met anyone face to face, or at least not until recently. Everything was through email, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, phone calls, etc. So it really truly was a virtual experience, not only for the review, but even for the coordination and communication processes throughout the entire compliance review, monitoring, and now we're in the corrective action phase. So I would say, just from a sort of a coordination standpoint, if you, for those of you who have not gone through this, just some helpful hints from my vantage point. One, have one person be the coordinator or the communicator on behalf of your team. I think that really worked out well for us. So when NIFA was sending out communications, I was the person that managed those communications, and I kept the dean, I kept the associate dean for extension involved and include in as well. And then the other thing that I really loved about this process with NIFA is that NIFA is also very flexible in terms of just the institution letting them know how many people need to be included on the communication. So I think having that spelled out front for your institution is very helpful. The other thing that I thought was very critical for us, and I think Greg already touched upon this, is having some sort of whether it's a shared drive, Greg mentioned Microsoft Teams, we use Microsoft OneDrive, having all those materials stored in one place where you can have access to it. And what we did at our campus, we use a OneDrive system for all the campus materials. And then in some cases in the county offices where we had to get information, we had to use Google Drive, and I was able to get some of those materials sort of portaled into the OneDrive system. So having an online or some sort of shared site for hosting materials is definitely the best way to go. You do not want to have email, especially if you're emailing or trying to transmit sensitive documents, particularly complaint data, things of that nature. Definitely using more of a secure process in terms of sharing information, I thought was very critical. The other thing that I think is very important to note here is teamwork. One person can't be the controller of this entire process or the manager. It really is a shared effort. And I will also recognize that coming into the position, and I leaned a lot in the early beginning stages on Meredith Weinstein, who is the evaluation and accountability coordinator at North Carolina State University. And the reason why that's unique to North Carolina is because North Carolina has one statewide extension system. And I think, many of the states also have a